As was mentioned, right now I am based in Washington, D.C., working at the White House as a senior policy advisor to the U.S. Chief Technology Officer, Megan Smith. But I ended up there because of my work to pave the way to ensure that Black and Latinx individuals succeed in the tech sector, which I lead as co-founder and CEO of Code 2040. So I'll talk a little bit about both those things. And given the focus of this day on Black women business owners and the fact that November is National Entrepreneurship Month in the US, I'm actually going to focus on the intersection of tech entrepreneurship, equity, and access, and how we might support more Black female entrepreneurs. So first, why is this important? I think it's sort of intuitive to folks in this room, but it's really helpful to be grounded in the data as well. The Kauffman Foundation recently released a report that showed that in the US, nearly all of net job creation and about 20% of gross job creation comes from startups. So entrepreneurs are really the engine of job growth in the US. Tech is another key engine of growth. The tech industry has not only been growing rapidly, but it's also been infiltrating the other industries that we've been familiar with over the years and creating new industries as it grows. And this leads me to the second reason why this is important, which is around innovation and who is driving innovation and the products and companies that grow today and that push the boundaries. And the types of industries that get sort of taken over by tech and who's building those products and making those decisions. So you think of everything from education and the way the internet is being used to deliver coursework in new ways, to things like the President's initiative, Computer Science for All, working on ensuring that every student has access to high-quality computer science education regardless of their income level or their zip code. And of course, there are organizations that are working on this as well, like Black Girls Code, Code.org, Girls Who Code, ensuring that our vision of the future of tech entrepreneurship is built by a much broader, more diverse group than we currently see in the industry. And it's important to realize what that data looks like too. So the tech industry today, this industry that's redefining the way we communicate with one another, the way we gain access to information, the way we travel, this tech industry does not look like the US. So women make up about half of today's workforce and less than 20% of leadership in tech companies. People of color make up about 36% of the workforce, 20% of major tech firms, and when you start to drill down into different races and ethnicities, the data does not look great, particularly for Black and Latinx communities. And the numbers look worse for tech entrepreneurs. So I'm wondering if there's anyone in the room who believes that men come up with 97% of good ideas. Well, male CEOs get 97% of venture funding. Black and Latinx founders get about 1% of venture funding. And when you start to look at the intersection of race and gender, the numbers are even worse. So according to a study called Project Diane, run by an organization, Digital Undivided, that's based here in Atlanta, Black women receive only 0.2% of all venture funding deals. And to look at that in the raw numbers, over a 2-year period, that's 24 deals out of over 10,000. Where there is a Black woman as the CEO. But the status quo does not need to be the future. Those of us here today know that the rate at which, given the rate at which Black women start businesses, there's huge potential for Black women to lead and drive huge amounts of job growth. But I say potential because we're not necessarily seeing that borne out in the data right now. We heard that talk about sort of the corner store and what that type of entrepreneurship is sort of stereotyped to look like. But the data bears out. Right now, Black women run 1.9 million businesses in the US. All these businesses have 375,000 employees. That's 1 employee for every 5 businesses. So most of the businesses that we're talking about right now are one-woman shows. And there's huge potential for job creation and wealth development if we can help these businesses scale. And figuring this out is critical. There's two reasons why. One is because of the types of products and solutions that the high growth businesses are putting out there that we're adopting and using as a country. We need to make sure that there's a broader swath of the population that's developing these products. But also, as we just heard, because of this number 2040, the start of the decade when people of color will be the majority in the US. And frankly, in California, where I spend most of my time based, California is already majority minority. We can't afford to vastly underhire and underfund over half the population. And we've seen in the past few weeks, and we'll see moving forward, how these tech platforms, how these online platforms shape the dialogue and discourse. And we need to make sure that there's a broad portion of the population that's making choices about how these algorithms work and how these conversations are shaped. We can't afford for Black women to continue to receive only 0.2% of venture funding deals. So there's a number of organizations working on this. Code 2040, as I mentioned, I co-founded and run is one of them. We believe that creating a more inclusive tech sector is our best shot at closing the wealth gap for Blacks and Latinos in the US. So what we do is we place students in internships. We work with students on college campuses. We actually coach tech companies on how to upgrade their policies and practices to be more inclusive. And we also work with entrepreneurs. So we have a program which this year is in 7 cities where we have an entrepreneur in residence who we support with equity-free financing to help them grow their business. And they also work to connect the local diverse community with the local tech ecosystem. And I'm really excited to share that starting next year, our 8th city will be Atlanta. So we'll be here. But Code 2040 is far from the only thing happening in the space, and it's not just about supporting entrepreneurs, but also about resourcing them appropriately. And part of that is realizing that while that venture data is important, it's also important to recognize that venture financing is rarely an entrepreneur's first round of financing. Usually, what entrepreneurs start out with is looking for friends and family money. And if you look at the statistics about the wealth distribution in the US, we know that the median net worth of a white family is about $100,000. The median net worth of a Black family is about $5,000. So you start to think about where that friends and family funding is going to come from and who's likely to have access to that. And it's usually not in our communities of color, which means we need to find new ways to create risk capital for communities of color. And I think there are really 2 ways to do this. One is around educating existing investors. Last month at the White House, the Office of Science and Technology Policy and the Department of Commerce, with September Hargrove, who's here today, hosted a gathering of angel and seed investors to discuss ways to bring more early stage financing to underrepresented entrepreneurs from groups such as communities of color and Black women. This month, several of those investors have taken that charge and mobilized and are working on creating plans for ways that they can upgrade their own systems and their own practices in order to make more inclusive investments. And there'll be more news on that later this month. The second thing to think about, though, in addition to educating existing investors, is how do we create more investors, and particularly more investors from communities of color. The Small Business Administration recently released a study that showed that when women invest, they invest in more women, and when people of color invest, they invest in more people of color and more women, and that these investments perform as well as investments made by white male investors. So we need to start to think about, for those folks in our communities who do have capital, are there people who can deploy that capital to help support early stage entrepreneurs, particularly those who might not have access to early stage friends and family funding? In short, if we're going to have a shot at building a real sustainable, thriving tech ecosystem that's going to survive and thrive in the coming years, we have to field the whole team as entrepreneurs and as investors. We have to ensure that tech is diverse and that tech is inclusive. And we have to ensure that our entrepreneurs from all backgrounds understand and how to engage in and leverage technology to grow their companies. We have to ensure that folks from all backgrounds have access to the exposure, the mentorship, and the resources that they need to launch companies, solve our biggest problems, and build the platforms that we're using to communicate in the future. We need everybody's talents, and this is more critical now than ever. Thank you.